The topic of lament requires us to acknowledge painful realities. And that means that some of what I'm going to say here about this morning in this sermon may be difficult for some of us. So if you need to talk further about anything you hear here today, or any other Sunday for that matter, know that Julie and I are available for further conversation. Now may God bless us with courage and compassion as we explore lament together. In her book, I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness, Austin Channing Brown tells this story of a field trip she took when she was in university. Our bus pulled into a museum consisting of only one exhibit, a history of lynching. Every wall was filled with photographs of dark-skinned human beings swinging by their necks. A mother and son hanging over a bridge, burned bodies swinging over dying fires, white children staring in wide-eyed wonder while their parents proudly point to the mutilated body behind them. The cruel smiles of white faces testifying to the joy of the occasion. We came across newspaper stories that advertised lynchings as community events. In another case, we saw a postcard. On the front was a photo of a mutilated man still hanging from a rope. On the other side, a handwritten note, "Sorry we missed you at the barbecue." There was no sound as we walked through the exhibit. We could barely breathe, let alone speak. When we climbed back on the bus, all that could be heard were sniffles. The emotion was thick. It was as if no time had passed between the generation in the pictures and the one sitting on that bus. It was all so real. The first students to break the silence were white. "I didn't know this even happened. It's not my fault I wasn't there." They reached for anything that would distance themselves from the pain and anger of the moment. Anything that would ward off guilt and shame, the shock and devastation. The Black students had passed beyond any need to appear polite. We shared personal stories of pain, lynchings that had happened to our own families, trying to make real those bodies from the photographs. But we weren't just interested in focusing on Black bodies, we were going to focus on white ones too. A tall Black woman, a senior that year, peered at us all as she spoke evenly, almost disarmingly in the heat of the moment. "I just want to say that I'm having a hard time even being mad at you white people anymore. I think I've just been convinced that white people are inherently evil. You can't help it. You steal and kill, you enslave and lynch. You are just evil." Then she handed the microphone back to the next person and calmly took her seat. The white students hadn't appreciated her words, but the Black students on the bus could have kissed her feet. She had done what social convention and respectability politics said not to do. She had spoken her truth, even if it meant hurting the feelings of every white person on that bus. The tension climbed. Black and white grew further and further apart with each new speaker. The white students defended their family histories, as Black students searched for the words to express how it felt to stare at ours in the photos in that museum. Then, as we pulled into a parking lot to break for lunch, another white student stood to speak. But instead of a different variation on "please don't make me responsible for this," she took a deep breath and gave in to the emotion of it all. "I don't know what to do with what I've learned," she said. "I can't fix your pain and I can't take it away, but I can see it. And I can work for the rest of my life to make sure your children don't have to experience the pain of racism." And then she said 9 words that I've never forgotten. "Doing nothing is no longer an option for me." that white woman did what the other white people on the bus were refusing to do. Instead of trying to distance herself from the pain, she saw and acknowledged it. By allowing the pain to touch her, she was able to respond in a way that opened a door to transformation. She was able to make a crack for resurrection. And I have witnessed similar dynamics to those experienced by the students on that bus many times around many issues. I've been the person who minimizes someone else's pain and tries to distance myself from the horror of a situation. And I've also been the person who wants to scream, "This matters! Why are you not taking this seriously? Can't you see how much this hurts?" I notice this kind of dynamic in myself and other settlers when we learn about the realities of Indian residential schools and the efforts to systemically wipe out entire cultures and erase land rights, as well as the current challenges faced by many Indigenous communities. You've probably heard comments like, "It was a long time ago. They meant well. It wasn't all bad. It's not my fault." I saw minimizing of pain and dismissing of responsibility in some posts on Facebook after the revelation a few weeks ago that John Vanier, the founder of the L'Arche movement and author of many well-known books on spirituality, had coercive sexual relationships with at least 6 women with whom he was in a position of spiritual care over several decades. Many people wanted to immediately defend his legacy and argued that we are all sinners. Yep, we are all sinners, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't say clearly, abusing women who trust you is wrong. Full stop, end of sentence. I experienced profound disconnection from community when I desperately needed to lament that someone in our presbytery had been found to have committed pastoral sexual misconduct. But at the very next meeting, without ever saying we weep with those who weep, or this is not how the church should be, we were talking about forgiveness. Nope, way too soon. Forgiveness may come, but first we must lament the broken trust and wounding of vulnerable people in the name of the church of which we are a part. And I feel unseen when people seem to accept as no big deal, since it's not here in Canada, that there are still 68 countries in the world where it is a criminal offense for me to love another woman, including a dozen where the death penalty is an option, and many more where it would be dangerous in terms of potential street violence that you can expect the authorities to turn a blind eye to, even if it isn't illegal. When people talk nonchalantly about winter vacations to countries I would never dare visit, I wince a little bit inside. And there are so many other places where the story of those college students on the bus is echoed in the real-life experience of people. Both those who feel challenged by the experiences of injustice in their daily lives and in the history of their people, and those who feel challenged to know that their people have participated in oppression and injustice. Many of us find ourselves in both roles at different times and in different moments of our lives. As human beings, our natural tendency is to want to move away from pain, our own and other people's. Because pain hurts and we don't like to hurt. However, when we do that, we also move away from the possibility of resurrection, and we leave those who are hurting feeling abandoned and unseen. When we avoid the pain in our lives and in the world, we diminish ourselves and others, and we limit the possibilities for transformation. Fortunately, our faith tradition has a spiritual practice that helps us to confront our natural tendency to avoid the messy parts. It's called the practice of lament. And if the spiritual practice of lament isn't very familiar to you, you are not alone. Because we like to avoid pain, we also like to avoid lament. But it is deeply grounded in our biblical story and in the practice of the church throughout the ages, because it is absolutely essential to a full and rich life. Without lament, the road to Easter is much, much, much harder. It might even be impossible. The psalm that Leith read earlier is one of many psalms of lament. And to paraphrase that psalm in modern colloquial language, "Hey God, where are you when I need you? I'm in trouble and I cannot find you. Have you noticed that the wicked are trampling on the poor? Could you please do something about that? They are lying and oppressing people. Everything they say is suspect. They destroy the innocent and abuse their power. No one is safe from their rampages. So God, do something about it. Stop the oppression, hold people to account, fix the wicked people, or at least keep them away from me. Help those in need so terror will be banished from the earth." Lament is the practice of being brutally honest with ourselves and God about how we feel about the pain in our own lives in the world. We find lament in many places in the Bible, including about a third of the book of Psalms, some of which Julie referred to earlier. Virtually all of the book of Lamentations and the book of Job. Parts of the works of most prophets, Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, and many of the epistles in the New Testament. Some of the biblical laments have pretty colorful language that can feel a bit shocking to modern audiences, like this morning's psalm, which advises people to ask God to break other people's arms. Lamenters in the Bible pray for vengeance on their enemies, often in very graphic ways. They tell God that they are devastated and wish they could die. They complain about all the ways in which God is failing to take care of the world as it needs to be taken care of. On the surface, lament seems like the very opposite of faith. It's complaining to and about God, after all. Yet in many ways, it is perhaps the most powerful expression of faith that there is. When we lament to God, we invite God into the raw truth of how we are. We invite God to come into the heart of our pain. We trust God with the real us, even if it isn't pretty or polished or put together or polite. And even though it's not easy and seldom pretty, lament does help us on our spiritual journey in several very important ways. First, it allows us to acknowledge our pain. When we are hurting, our culture tends to tell us to keep it inside, especially if the hurt doesn't pass quickly. In the immediate aftermath of a crisis or loss, most people are able to accept that those involved are stunned and grieving and maybe even angry. But as the weeks and months go by, we start to worry that our friends and loved ones are going to get tired of our grief, our sadness, our worries, our anger, our pain. But the difficult emotions and challenges of life don't usually have a quick fix. Genuine lament invites us to experience our pain fully and to allow it to touch our souls. It gives us space to ask what wisdom this pain might have to offer us. It requires us to own our struggle rather than hide from it or minimize it. Regardless of whether we decide to share our lament with trusted loved ones, we can always take our lament to God. In doing so, we'll never damage or strain our relationship with God. On the contrary, it might deepen it in ways that we can barely begin to imagine. Second, the practice of lament allows us to offer genuine, empathetic solidarity to others. When we fail to lament the injustices and pain of the world, we say to sufferers, "You don't matter." That wasn't what the white people on the bus that day were trying to say to their black colleagues, but it is what they did say. By denying and distancing themselves, they left the black people wondering if white people were really evil, since they couldn't acknowledge the horror of what they had just witnessed. It isn't what the white church is intended to say to Indigenous communities, but it is often what has been heard. It isn't what we mean to say to people who have been hurt by sexual violence, but when we make excuses for the perpetrators and fail to name the harm done as wrong, we do just that. Saying nothing or minimizing the injury feels to the person who has been hurt like abandonment. If we can learn to lament together in community about the brokenness of our world, both past and present, personal and corporate, then we can begin to come together in solidarity to struggle towards a different future. Third, lament opens up possibilities for transformation and change. When we look at things as they really are, in all their painful messiness, then we can begin to discern where change might be possible. Or as the woman on that bus remarked, we arrive at the place where doing nothing is no longer an option. Psychotherapist Miriam Greenspan, in her book Healing Through the Dark Emotions, talks about the alchemy of painful emotions like grief, fear, and despair, whereby fully feeling and experiencing our pain can help us to open up space for gratitude, faith, and joy. Often people argue that we shouldn't lament because they are afraid that we will remain stuck there, wallowing in pain and suffering. However, on the contrary, acknowledging pain and suffering helps us to move forward authentically. It's not that we don't forgive those who have hurt us. It's not that we don't let go of suffering. But first, we must attend to the pain. Otherwise, the letting go is more likely to be denial or avoidance than true release. You can't get to Easter Sunday without walking through Holy Week. So like last week, we want to give you a few minutes now to think about how you might live out this theme in your own life this week. There is a purple piece of paper in your announcement insert if you wish to write something down as an intention and keep it somewhere where you can see it to help remind you. Alternatively, you are free to silently ponder how you might practice lament or to engage in silent prayer for the world at this time. Some possibilities to consider as you think about how you might practice lament this week include: is there some aspect of your life that you need to lament about? How might you carry that lament to God this week? Is there someone in your life who might welcome the opportunity, if you could offer it, for a compassionate space to lament freely? Is there an issue in our community or the world that is troubling your heart? How could you lament about that reality? And if there isn't a particular issue, how might you read the news or engage with the world around you in a way that allows the pain of the world to break your heart? Let us offer our prayerful intentions now.